Good morning, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure as I welcome you all to ICRIER's 14th Annual International G20 Conference, organized in partnership with Asian Development Bank Institute, ADBI, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. The theme for this year's conference is India's G20 Presidency, Crafting an Indian Narrative on Resilient, Inclusive, and Sustainable Economy. As you may know, we have been organizing these conferences since 2009, prior to the G20 summit. The discussions in these conferences have provided a platform for engaging eminent researchers, academicians, and policymakers in rich debate on topics of relevance to the G20 summit. Year after year, the conference has been extremely successful in facilitating exchange of ideas and views at both a scholarly and policy level. After two completely virtual editions due to obvious reasons, we are back physically at a time when India is set to assume the G20 presidency in precisely a month from today. As you would note, this year we have an excellent lineup of speakers, many of whom are likely to play an instrumental role in India's G20 presidency. For our first session, which is on leveraging G20 presidency to create an Indian narrative on resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy, we have none other than India's G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, joining us virtually from New York to deliver the keynote address. On the dais, we have ICRIER's Director and Chief Executive, Dr. Deepak Mishra, and Chairman, Mr. Pramod Bhasin. Before I invite Shri Amitabh Kant to deliver his keynote address, let me request Dr. Deepak Mishra to kindly give the welcome remarks. Dr. Mishra.
Thank you, Pratik, and hello and good morning, everyone. Honorable India's G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, the esteemed speakers, panelists of the conference, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all those who are present here, as well as many more who are connected online. Let me welcome you all to ICRIER's 14th Annual International G20 Conference. We have been hosting this conference since 2009 and in recent years with our two collaborators, IMF and ADB Institute. But this year conference assumes a special significance for at least three reasons. First, it is perhaps the last major conference before India assumes G20 presidency. So if you want to get a leg up on what are going to be the key priorities for India's G20 presidency, you do not want to miss today's event. At the end of today, not only you will get a sense of the grand preparation underpinning India's presidency, but also the substantive issues and priorities that would characterize India's leadership. Second, almost all the key architects that are involved in the preparation of India's G20 presidency are here and will be speaking at this conference. We'll be hearing from Sherpa, then we'll have Honorable Finance Minister speaking to us at 3 p.m. The G20 Chief Coordinator, Mr. Shringal, will be speaking at immediately after lunch, and Niti Ayog's chairperson will be delivering a special address at 4 p.m. Equally importantly, the senior policymakers from Ministry of Finance, External Affairs, Commerce, and others will speak at this conference, as well as heads of various think tanks and multilateral organizations. I can assure you that you will feel much better informed and much more knowledgeable on G20 issues at the end of the day than you were at the start of the day. The important reason I believe the conference is significant is that you're going to see a different tone to many of the G20 conferences that you have attended before, precisely because the theme that we have chosen, crafting an Indian narrative on resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy, or in short, RISE. R-I-S-E. We hope and believe that as India assumes the presidency, it will also mark the rise of the Indian economy, the rise of the developing countries' voice in the global economic diplomacy, and the rise of the global economy from the depth of a prolonged economic crisis caused by a pandemic, a ravaging war, and unprecedented inflation crisis. But the reason for crafting an Indian narrative on global issues goes beyond rhetoric. Development has many facets to it. The facts, analysis, and policy facing a development problem can be very different depending on the prism one looks at it. The presidency will allow India to influence the G20 nations to look at the global problem from a developing country perspective. Therefore, crafting the narrative, I believe, is what will separate India's presidency from all the presidency that has preceded before. So you got the three reasons I mentioned: hearing about a new development narrative, listening it from the people who are going to craft this narrative, and getting to know about it before others get to know, is the three main reasons why this conference makes it so special. And I'm deeply grateful for everyone who have joined in person as well as online to this event. I hope you'll stay till the very end of the event and actively participate in all the sessions. India G20 presidency also marks an important milestone for ICRIER. We are proud to be the G20 knowledge partner for the Ministry of Finance, Commerce, Power, and Department of Telecommunication, as well as working very closely with Sherpa's office. We have a dedicated website on G20 issues and an exclusive Twitter handle on G20. At ICRIER, we are delighted to be able to part of this G20 economic festival that is about to sweep the nation. So without much ado, let me now turn to Mr. Amitabh Kant to deliver the keynote address of the event. After Mr. Kant speaks, I'll request Mr. Pramod Bhasin, the chairperson of ICRIER, to moderate the session and provide the vote of thanks. Mr. Kant needs no introduction to this audience, but I'll do so for the benefit of some of our foreign participants. An alumnus of Modern School, St. Stephen College, and JNU, until few weeks ago, Mr. Kant was the CEO of Niti Aayog. To me, Mr. Kant is one of the most optimistic, articulate, and well-informed policymakers you can find in India today. In every respect, he's the right person in the right job at the right time to lead India's G20 effort. The fact that Mr. Kant agreed to speak to us from his current location, where it is nearly midnight, speaks volume about his dedication to the country and his commitment to G20 issues. Over to you, Mr. Kant, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra, Mr. Pramod Bhasin, Chairman of ICRIER, Mr. Deepak Mishra, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly delighted to be participating in this 14th annual International G20 conference, and I just want to really appreciate ICRIER's very long commitment to the cause of G20 and for creating a huge amount of awareness on G20 in India over the last 14 years. So I greatly appreciate and I'm truly delighted to be here. India will take over presidency of G20 at a time when the world is highly polarized. It's a fractured world. The world is witnessing a debt crisis. There is a looming recession. There's a slowing down of the global economy. The SDGs in the post-COVID era have been severely impacted. Instead of progress, we've seen a regression on most of the SDGs. There's a huge conflict in Europe, and there is an intensifying of the great power competition. And it is at this time, Indonesia has faced a lot of challenges during this period. And when we take over presidency from Indonesia on 1st December, the challenge for India will be to really demonstrate its leadership, its ability to strengthen multilateralism against all odds, and also to be action-oriented and be ambitious. It's also important to say that after Indonesia is an emerging country, post-Indonesia, we have the presidency, and after us, there will be Brazil and then South Africa. So you have 4 emerging markets, one after another, doing the G20 presidency. And therefore, it's a challenge for the emerging markets during this time, this period, to demonstrate their ability to deliver on G20. Actually, G20 comprises of about, as most people are aware, about close to 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for about 78% of the global trade. It's an important body because unlike the United Nations, it's not a very large, unwieldy body. It comprises of both the G7 and some of the major emerging markets. It's not an elitist body like G7, which is just a body of rich nations, but here G20 is a compact organization. It bridges the North-South divide. It includes the world's biggest and geopolitically most powerful countries. And the decisions of G20 actually impact the working of global economy. In the past, a series of decisions taken by G20 have actually managed to push growth and bring in greater financial stability. It's also important to say that it's not a treaty-based organization like the Bretton Woods institutions, which were established in the post-World War II. It does not have a formal secretariat. The secretariat moves year after year. It's an informal body that works through consensus. So the challenge is one that India should be able to have a strong content, to my mind. It should have very professional issue notes on the basis of which there should be debate and discussion. So first and foremost is its ability to create good content on the basis of which these issues are debated, discussed, and then it should have the ability to steer discussions. And that means that under both the finance track, which has 8 different working streams, and the Sherpa track, which over the years has grown and has close to about 13 working groups, we should be able to clearly push through what we want to achieve. And that would really require that we should have a very clear objective of what we want to drive. Secondly, it's also an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to demonstrate a unique experience of India and send back every single visitor who visits India during this period, and all the top leadership of the G20 will visit India during this period, to send them back with a unique experience of India, which is to really mentally rejuvenate them and invigorate them and send them back as a brand ambassador of India. So this is critical. So in my view, the priorities will be spelled out by the Honorable Prime Minister when he launches India's website, etc. He'll spell that out at great length in due course. But looking at the global scenario, I think it's very important that G20 as an organization at a point of time when there is a looming recession, G20 is able to give a direction to. Important thing is for G20 to be able to drive growth, global growth. To my mind, that should be the centerpiece of what G20 should aim at. It should be able to drive growth, which is inclusive, which is resilient, which is sustainable, and is able to give a clear direction towards growth. And this is because growth is the basic fundamental of for what G20 was originally established, and is fundamental to everything that it would aim to do. So to my mind, it's critical that we are able to drive growth, because the IMF has actually brought down has said that the global GDP growth next year will slow down to 2.7%, even slower than what it had said its forecast was 2.9% in July. Global growth will continue to fall, and it will get further impacted by the pressures from the war in Ukraine, by the strengthening of the dollar, the high energy and food prices, inflation, and sharply higher interest rates, warning that conditions would actually worsen significantly next year. And therefore, while India may be will be the fastest growing large economy in the world, it is important that, the three largest economies, the United States, China, and the Euro area will all continue to slow down. And therefore, as the IMF chief economist has said, the worst is yet to come. And for many people, 2023 will feel like a recession. And therefore, it's critical that the G20 focuses very strongly on economic growth. Earlier, on several occasions, G20 has taken a very, very strong measures to drive growth. So that will be critical to my mind. The second critical area to my mind is that we are going to be midway through the 2030 development agenda, and that is about sustainable development goals. And the COVID era has really impacted learning outcomes. It has impacted health outcomes. It has impacted nutrition. It has impacted all SDG goals. COVID has actually set back progress on SDG by almost 4 years. Close to about 120 million people have been pushed into poverty in 2020. There are 75 million fewer jobs. Extreme poverty is on rise for the first time in 2 decades. And, so to my mind, bringing SDG center stage and accelerating the pace of implementation of SDGs will be very critical. And as the United Nations Secretary General has said, there is a need for G20 to work out a clear action plan and a financial action plan for driving SDGs in a very big way. And that is, to my mind, very critical because LDCs have been impacted. Even in developing countries, people have been impacted very severely. There is a huge, huge regression on the implementation of SDG, and that is critical. The third key area, to my mind, which is really critical from the perspective of global growth, that global growth has to be sustainable in the context of climate action. And therefore, while India has not contributed to carbonizing the world, it has contributed very little to total carbon space, just about 1.5%, whereas logically on a per capita income space, if you look at 1.5 degree centigrade, and if you were to look at the total carbon space of 2,400 gigatons, it should be entitled to about 17.5% of the total carbon space. It's not contributed to carbonizing, but India views climate action not as a challenge, but as a huge opportunity to technologically leapfrog. It has demonstrated its huge entrepreneurship in the renewable energy. It is demonstrating a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship in the field of green hydrogen and using renewable to crack water and produce green hydrogen and become the cheapest production and technology hub for the world. And therefore, this is an opportunity really to bring climate action center stage. And how does the world grow sustainably in the years to come will be a key challenge. And therefore, accelerating this development with climate action, that is green development, will be very critical. Now, the Prime Minister has repeatedly spoken about the LIFE movement, which has been launched recently by the UN Secretary General in Kevadia. That is about the lifestyle for sustainability, which will be a center stage of whatever India does as far as climate action is driven. And that is born out of our belief that it is not nations which will, if you look back at the history from COP1 to COP26, the developed world has not been able to live up to its commitments. It has not even been able to live up to its commitment of 100 billion per annum, which it is meant to do to support developing countries for climate justice. None of the commitments given by the developed world from COP1 to COP26 have been fulfilled. And therefore, our belief is that it's not countries, but individual behavioral change and community behavioral change will be very critical. And therefore, life will be a critical driver of growth. Much of the developing world is still to urbanize, and how we urbanize in terms of new cities, which are based on walking, cycling, public transportation, and how we develop clean energy of the future, and how do we just transition will be critical. And all this will be a very critical, the life program. The fourth is that if you have to accelerate the pace of SDGs, and if you have to accelerate the pace of implementation of green development, it is very important that the existing Bretton Woods institutions, which were built for the post-World War II period, are significantly restructured. These are institutions which have played a particular role in the post-World War II period, but these institutions increasingly need to become institutions for supporting they need to become institutions for climate change, for financing climate change. They need to become institutions for financing sustainable development goals. And therefore, our view is that these institutions need a lot of restructuring to be able to support credit enhancement. Instead of doing direct lending, they should be doing credit enhancement. They should be doing blended finance. They should be doing first loss guarantees, so that whatever they lend at present, almost 10x of that resources can flow in. And that doesn't require large political capital. We are not talking about structural change, or we are not talking about equity restructuring, but we're talking about change as far as program of implementation is concerned. The administrative and the political will to redefine these institutions for the need of the 21st century, and how do you turn them into institutions of 21st century, that is critical. Fourthly, so that will be one key issue that we'll focus on jointly. And I think the other key priority to my mind, which is very, very important, that whatever we do in the world today, and in India, the latest NFS data shows that there are more women than men in India, that there is a need for a women-led development. And therefore, how do you bring in greater financial inclusion for women? How do you enhance their productivity? How do you improve their learning and health outcomes? How do you make them really, how do you provide better women leadership? How do you enhance their productivity in an economy like India and in the developing world? So women-led development, if 50% plus of the population is going to be women, how do you ensure a women-led development is very, very critical. So these are our, this is what I think will be broadly what we think should be done. But there are several issues which will enable us to push the India narrative. And as far as India narrative is concerned, for us, digital transformation is very critical. India has demonstrated that it has built up an alternative model, which is open source, which is based on open APIs, which is based on open standards, is interoperable. It is consent-based, and we've been able to build digital identities. We've been able to do data empowerment. We've been able to do fast payments. Fast payments to an extent where we are doing almost 7x. If you look at the total real-time transactions done by India, is about 48.6 billion, which is about 41% of the real-time transactions in the world. The next is China, with just about 16% of the total real-time transactions. So we are doing about 7x of the transactions than what United States and Europe do together. We do about 3x of the real-time transaction than what China does. And therefore, India has built up a unique model. And these transactions have then led to many startups doing paperless, cashless lending to both people below the poverty line and for MSMEs. And there are many young startups who've done wealth creation, like Zerodha, etc., which is all cashless, paperless. And then there are many others like Digit and ACO who have done insurance, end-to-end insurance, which is totally cashless, paperless. So what India has demonstrated is a unique model of financial inclusion. When we started Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, there were just 19% of the accounts were with women. Today, 56% of the accounts are with women. Their deposits have gone up by 71%. 600 schemes of the government, we put money straight into the bank account of the beneficiaries without any leakages. So what it is an alternative model. Most of this technological disruptions happens from the developed world. This is a model which are developing and an emerging market established, which to my mind combines both privacy and innovation, and will in subsequent years become the model for the rest of the world. So there is a huge opportunity for India as it undertakes the G20 presidency to demonstrate a very powerful new approach in digital transformation. And this has enabled India to technologically leapfrog in many ways. And I think important thing to understand is that there are 4 billion people in the world who do not have digital identity. There are 1.5 billion people who do not have a bank account. The fast payment mechanism is there only in 55 countries of the world. So there is a huge opportunity to use the model of India to really transform the lives of citizens across the world. This is very, very critical to my mind. And this is an opportunity. What a recent study by the Bank of International Settlement has said is that what India has achieved in a period of last 10 years, it would have taken India 50 years to achieve. So India has done some remarkable things. And therefore, this digital transformation is very, very critical to my mind. And that will be one of the key India narratives during our presidency. The other is the size and scale of what India has done in the infrastructure sector. It's important to understand this because many of us sitting in India do not realize this quite often. In the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan accounts, Yojana, we between 2014 and 2017, we opened up close to about 400 million bank accounts. I mean, that's more than the population of the United States of America. So every second bank account opened during this period was opened in India. UPI, as I said, we do about 48.6 billion real-time transactions. That's 20% more than what US and China does. Housing, we've actually in the last 6 years, we've done 30 million houses. So every single citizen of Australia, we've actually equivalent to a citizen of Australia, we've provided houses. Roads we built up in the last 6 years, we've done 55,000 kilometers roads. That's like making roads through 3/4 of Europe. And in vaccination, we've done cashless, paperless, digital vaccination to 2.5 billion citizens, 2.5 billion vaccinations we did. That's six and a half times the population of USA and 5 times the population of EU. So the size and scale of what India has attempted to do in terms of infrastructure, or look at water connections, 81 million piped water connection. That's like providing a water connection to everyone in Brazil. So a huge amount of infrastructure on ground has been delivered, and this is an opportunity to demonstrate that and to be able to say that the size and scale of India is very important. The third is, I think it also gives us this opportunity to demonstrate India's soft power in a very big way, and that is demonstrate through India's, it's not just the hard power of India, but the soft power of India in terms of its culture, in terms of its cuisine, in terms of its people. And if India is planning to host about 200 events of all these working groups, the finance track, the Sherpa tracks, 200 plus events in 55 different cities. In addition to that, the business track is holding 90 events. The think tank is holding about 100 events. So you can imagine there are close to about actually 450 to 500 events which will be held in different parts of India. Every state, every union territory will be hosting an event. So this is also an opportunity to accelerate the pace of infrastructure improvement. This is an opportunity for states to demonstrate their unique heritage. This is an opportunity to demonstrate for the states really to show their travel and tourism. This is an opportunity really for the states to do transformational work in India. This opportunity will never come again. To have 42 leaders of the world together in September 9th and 10th in Delhi, but huge spin-offs in the states. So that is a massive opportunity which India should really utilize to drive many of the states. And so broadly, my view is that this G20, while the broad priorities will be spelled out by the Prime Minister shortly, but given the global scenario, growth, sustainable growth, green development with life, pushing for digital transformation, having accelerated and resilient kind of women-led development, and a need for reformed 21st century institutions, along with pushing the India narrative for digital transformation, for the infrastructure work that it has done, for projecting India's unique soft power, its culture, its heritage, its cuisine, all that will be critical. So at the end of it all, it works out to all of us, whether it's the Sherpa track, whether it's the finance track, whether it's the large number of engagement groups, all working towards the same, all of us working towards the same objectives, working towards the same outcomes and delivering on them. So what the Prime Minister has clearly said is that this G20 must be very transformational. It must make a paradigm shift from the past G20s. It must be very outcome oriented, and it should deliver on outcomes, and it should be very, very Indian. It should have an Indian ethos, and that is that ensure that every citizen who comes, every participant who comes from across the world goes back as an Indian when he goes back from G20. So this is my broad perspective. With these few words, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amitabh. Can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Amitabh, thank you very much, Mr. Kant. It's an inspiring speech in the middle of the night. I'm sorry we've kept you up so late, but we really appreciate the enthusiasm and the energy you brought to us as a Sherpa going forward. I'm going to open this up to question and answers. I would love to do that, but I'll be very happy to start myself unless someone raises their hand urgently. But I can kick it off at the same time, Amitabh, and then hopefully we have many more questions for you. You know, we are in a unique position in India. We seem to be a calm in the middle of a global storm. The conflicts around the world continue to actually be very unpredictable, very unnerving, disrupting global supply chains and disrupting what we would have all considered to be a particularly terrific time for India and the world to take the lead. And instead, the withdrawal of countries into protectionism and many other areas continue to threaten the world's growth prospects. As we think about India's leadership, I love the concept that you've talked about in terms of digital transformation, the scale that you can talk about, the level of awareness that we can bring to the table. You know, one of the questions that I had in my mind was, given the inherent global conflicts that are going on, how can India help lead this effort and bring more consensus to it, bring out a better statement at the end of the G20, make all the great major partners work together? How can we help there, given our credibility as a vibrant democracy, and certainly one of the leading growth engines of this world going forward? I'll start with that. I have many more, but I'll love to open it up to others as well. Thanks, Amitabh.
So, Pramod, one is that every crisis is actually an opportunity, and how you use this crisis to be ambitious, to be action-oriented is very important, number one. Number two, to my mind, we should not just restrict G20 to, as academicians, to look at the communiques to be issued. But it's also about putting 42 of the top leaders of the world together. If these leaders, it's important that these leaders discuss amongst themselves, they are able to build a personal relationship, and they are able to utilize G20 to completely rethink the way the world is going. So to my mind, it's leadership which is critical. The world is short of great leaders. And I think what's important is that this India gives you that opportunity to bring global leadership together, which can redesign, restructure many of these institutions and redesign the world. So the human, behind the communique, let's not forget the human element to it, and that's very important. So if leaders realize that they have to, leaders with their personal touch, their personal conviction, if they are able to open up and if they are able to take leadership, the G20 can play a very critical role. Whenever G20 has played a critical role, especially when FSB was established, etc., it was leadership which is critical. So you are putting the top leaders of the world, you're putting the emerging leaders, you're putting developed countries leaders all together. And once they sit together, there is a huge opportunity for them to drive growth and climate action and SDGs in a far more positive manner. So I think communique is important, but beyond communique, it's the human element, the personal touch, the leadership, which is very, very important. And that is what G20 provides all through. Both in the finance track and in the Sherpa track, there's a huge element of leadership which will enable growth to be taken forward.
Very well said, Amitabh. Very well said. We do have some hands up. Arun, would you like to go, please? Mr. Myra, Arun Myra. We'll get a mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Amitabh. Mr. Kant, congratulations. It was really clear and inspiring. And you ended by saying that the G20 must be a paradigm shift in the way it impacts the world and the way it's conducted. And you said, don't look at it as an opportunity for academics to draft, scientific or academic communiques, but bringing people together, and let's not forget humans, as you said. So my question is about the role of the T20 and think tanks. What would you expect think tanks in India to do differently to enable the outcomes that you have in mind to come about?
So thank you, Mr. Myra. I've actually worked with a number of think tanks, and I've had several rounds of interaction with them. They've provided a lot of very positive and constructive inputs to our presidency in several areas. I've talked about some of these areas, but there are many other areas like green hydrogen, or there's climate and health, many areas which we are working on. And all these areas require a lot of knowledge. It requires a lot of technical expertise. It requires a lot of skills. And let me assure you that every single think tank we've interacted with, we've got a lot of very constructive and positive inputs from them. A T20 has now been constituted. All the leading think tanks of India have been put together. They're driving this. I'll personally work with them on T20 to take India's agenda forward. Once the Prime Minister announces this, I'll be very delighted to work with all of them. Similarly, not merely T20, there's the business 20 side of it. Because eventually, it's not just the political leaders, the world, if growth has to be driven, it has to be driven by the private sector. And therefore, the business 20 has to play a very major and a key role. And therefore, in all these areas, you have the youth 20, you have the women 20. So actually, G20 has grown in several dimensions over the years. It's become a very large a body across engagement group, across Sherpa track, across finance track. And I think we'll work with all of them to drive India's agenda forward. But Think 20 has a very critical, a very major role. Many of them will work with us in the Sherpa track with each of the working groups and contribute to that. And much of their communique goes into the final communique of the Sherpa track. Their recommendations play a very critical role in the Sherpa communication and finally into the leaders' communique itself. So they'll have to play a very major role.
Very good. Thank you, Amitabh. I'm going to turn to Ashok Gulati, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kant, for a very clear and inspiring address. Your first basic issue to focus on was propelling growth globally. But right now, global leaders are struggling to tame inflation, especially food and fuel, the energy crisis, and that is taking a toll on growth story. And 23 is likely to be a recession, as you rightly said, in most of the advanced economies. If that is the case, I'm looking at the implications for the larger humanity, especially those who are less privileged in Africa, who have to bear the brunt of this food prices. What is it that G20 can do to answer that? Thank you.
No, that's a very, very important question raised by Mr. Gulati, and one of the key tasks of India's presidency is also to demonstrate its a very significant leadership of the developing world. And therefore, when we take over the presidency of G20, India has invited a vast number of other countries from different regions of the world. But we will continue to debate and discuss with all LDCs, all countries, all the LDCs across, keep getting their inputs on this. You rightly said that there's been a huge impact on growth. New evidence compiled by both WHO and World Bank shows that the pandemic has actually halted 2 decades of global progress towards universal health coverage. More than 500 million people have been pushed or further pushed into extreme poverty because they have to pay for health services. The pandemic has grown into one of the greatest humanitarian issues in history. Almost 97 million more people have been pushed into poverty as a result of COVID. So this has all happened across Asia and Africa. And therefore, we will work with all these countries. There's a very major debt crisis which is taking place. Almost 60 countries are impacted with this. During the Saudi presidency, India played a very critical role in the debt sustainability measures that were taken. And we will continue to play a critical role in partnership with the developing nations across the world, particularly in Africa. And that is why much of the agenda that I'm talking about in terms of whether it's growth, whether it's green development, whether it's accelerating inclusive and resilient growth, all that is based on our worldview of taking everybody along, particularly the countries of Africa.
Thank you, Amitabh. We'll just do one last question. If we could make it, please, if we could make it very, very quick, I would really appreciate that.
Right. Good morning. Hello, Amitabh. It's always so exciting hearing you. And I missed part of it, but I'm glad what you said at the end. The last intervention is something which I wanted to raise with you in the context of the kind of diminishing multilateralism. I mean, how do you think we can use this G20 platform to give a boost to multilateralism in whatever way it can be done, including using some very concrete indicators to see that it can go? I mean, for example, you mentioned about Africa. Do we have African Union Commission in this G20? We have the European Commission, for example. I mean, there could be signaling to be done in this particular manner, that what we are interested in is, as India is, as Prime Minister has said very often, that we are interested in boosting multilateralism. So therefore, some very concrete steps we could be taken, even small steps, that would help the agenda. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so if you look at, it's a very important question again, because multilateralism has to be brought center stage. And if you look at many of our guest invitees, this is exactly what we've tried to do through institutions and the individual countries that we have invited. We want to shape the international agenda, largely because in the past we've responded to an agenda set by the developed world. We've given our comments to that agenda. This is the first time that we are in India, shaping the international agenda on crucial issues relating to climate action, the 2030 agenda, and many other issues. And to deliver on all these would require multilateralism of a very high order. We need all countries to believe in that multilateralism. It's important. But, the point which Pramod had made earlier, that you were seeing that large parts of the world is retreating into protectionism. I mean, you have the new Inflation Reduction Act of the USA, which is talking about giving $3 subsidy for green hydrogen to people who produce only in the United States of America. It's a very different regime from what has happened in the past. So it's total protectionism which is taking place in the world. And the global economy cannot grow without trade. Every time the global economy has grown, it's grown with trade. So everybody has to realize that if you have to lift people above poverty line, you have to have trade growing. And that would require many of these countries to move away from the kind of protectionism that they are working with right now. So I think that is something which leaders alone, and that's why I lay a lot of stress not merely on the communique part of it, that communiques will be issued, that there'll be good inputs, that issue notes will be well prepared, that there'll be outcomes. That is one component of it. But the human element of leaders being together and leaders interacting with each other to build a new narrative for the world of tomorrow, that is very critical and very important. And therefore, it will require an all of G20 approach to really transform the world. It cannot be done by the country which is doing the presidency in that particular year, but requires a political will of all the G20 countries, including those who we are inviting as our guests. So I think that is what we are aiming at. If you look at the list of our guests, we only strengthen our credentials as a leader, as a country which believes in very strong multilateralism. The Prime Minister wants our G20 to be a multilateral landmark and to be remembered. And that is what we'll do during the course of our presidency.
Amitabh, thank you. That was a wonderful, inspiring speech. I must cut it short. I know it's late for you. We have to move on. And I just wanted to thank you very, very much indeed. This is a unique moment in time for India. There's a huge vacuum in leadership across the world, as you've said. It is time, and we have one of the strongest leaders that exists in the world with the highest ratings, etc., that you could expect. We have a chance to take a lead, particularly in digital areas, in scale, in vaccination, in healthcare, climate change, climate finance, so many areas. And with your leadership and your energy, I hope this can be a phenomenally successful year in the midst of what is obviously a lot of gloom all around us in other areas. Thank you again. We are delighted that you've been able to participate. We are committed to working with you and the organizations that you represent, Amitabh, as we go forward to making G20, hopefully, one of the best presidencies that we can expect. Thank you again, and good night.
Thank you, Pramod. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Deepak.